The wrong room. Nora Bennett sat in her aging sedan outside the Riverside Community Center, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. 4 weeks had passed since the morning that destroyed her career. 4 weeks since she stood before the City Planning Commission, presenting her design for the downtown revitalization project, only to watch her hands tremble uncontrollably as panic seized her chest. The commissioners had stared as she gasped for air, unable to finish her sentence. Her boss had escorted her out while whispers filled the room behind them. The termination came 3 days later. The firm called it a mutual separation, but Nora understood the reality. In the competitive world of architecture, a public breakdown was career suicide. At 29, she found herself jobless, her reputation damaged, and her confidence shattered into pieces she did not know how to put back together. She checked her phone again, reading the support group description she had found online. New beginnings and fresh starts. The words had felt like hope when she registered 2 days ago. Taking a shaky breath, Nora grabbed her canvas bag and walked toward the building entrance. An honest mistake. The community center hallways smelled like lemon cleaner and stale coffee. Nora followed handwritten signs pointing toward room 8B, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the narrow window in the door, she saw a circle of metal folding chairs. Most were already occupied by people who looked tired and sad, just like her. She entered quietly and chose an empty seat near the middle of the circle. A woman with silver-streaked hair and warm brown eyes smiled at her from across the room. The coordinator, whose name tag read Margaret, began welcoming everyone and explaining their purpose together. As Margaret spoke about healing after being left at the altar, confusion washed over Nora like cold water. This was not a career transition group. This was for people whose weddings had been cancelled, whose partners had abandoned them at the most vulnerable moment. Her face flushed hot with embarrassment. She must have clicked the wrong link, joined the wrong meeting entirely. Leaving now would draw attention she desperately wanted to avoid. She decided to sit quietly and slip away during the first break. But then Margaret was introducing her as a newcomer, and suddenly every face in the circle turned toward Nora. Her throat tightened. She could run, but that would only make things worse. Something in Margaret's gentle expression made her stay seated. She cleared her throat and searched for words that would not expose her mistake. The story she told. Nora began softly. Her name was Nora. Her partnership had ended 4 weeks ago. They had been together for 8 years, and she had believed with her whole heart it would last forever. She gave everything to this partnership, her time, her energy, her dreams. But one morning, everything collapsed. Her partner said she was too emotional, too intense, that her passion was overwhelming. The words came easily once she started because they were true. She was talking about her architectural firm, not a romantic relationship. But losing her career felt exactly like the devastating breakup these people understood. Her job had been her identity, her purpose, the thing that made her feel valuable in the world. The worst part, Nora continued, her voice catching slightly, was that it happened in front of everyone. Their colleagues, their professional community. There was no privacy in her humiliation, no dignity left intact. She felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. Around the circle, people nodded with understanding. The laugh that cut deep. Then someone laughed. The sound was sharp and unexpected in the quiet room. Nora turned to see a man sitting in the back row. He looked about 34, devastatingly handsome in a navy suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His dark hair was styled perfectly, and his hazel eyes sparkled with barely hidden amusement. Beside him sat a younger woman who looked mortified, clearly his sister based on their similar features. The man spoke, though traces of humor still colored his voice. He was sorry, but did she really just compare losing her job to being left at the altar? The room went completely silent. Nora felt every eye bounce between her and this stranger who had seen through her carefully chosen words. Margaret stepped forward quickly. "Julian, please. Everyone's pain deserves respect." But Julian seemed unable to stop himself. Another laugh escaped his lips, quieter this time but just as cutting. Something inside Nora snapped. She had endured 4 weeks of pitying looks, hushed conversations, and crushing self-doubt. She would not accept mockery from a wealthy stranger who clearly had never struggled for anything in his privileged life. The exit. She stood abruptly. Her canvas bag slipped from her lap and hit the floor, spilling its contents across the worn carpet. Her keys scattered. Her phone bounced under a chair. A small potted succulent she kept for good luck rolled toward Julian's expensive shoes. Several pens rolled in different directions. Nora dropped to her knees, gathering her belongings with shaking hands. Julian stood immediately, his expression shifting from amusement to something that looked almost like regret. He moved toward her, but Nora held up one hand to stop his approach. She told him not to come closer. Her voice was sharp and clear despite the tears now streaming down her face. He was absolutely right. Compared to being abandoned at the altar, her situation must seem ridiculous and small. But here was what Julian did not understand. For Nora, that job was everything. It was her identity, her purpose, her proof that she mattered in this world. Losing it felt like losing herself completely. If that seemed funny to him, then clearly he had never had to question his worth or wonder if he would ever be enough again. Without waiting for any response, Nora walked out of the room. Behind her, she heard Margaret's sharp rebuke and murmurs of disapproval directed at Julian, but she did not look back. She pushed through the building's exit into the cool autumn evening. The fresh air hit her face as she made it to her car just before the sobs came. She had come looking for support and found fresh humiliation instead. The universe was not finished testing her yet, the aftermath. Inside the community center, Julian Hartwell stood frozen, staring at the door through which Nora had disappeared. Margaret's words of disappointment washed over him, but he barely registered them. All he could think about was the fire in Nora's eyes when she defended herself. The dignity with which she had gathered her scattered belongings from the floor. The raw truth in her words that had struck him harder than any business competitor ever had. His sister Grace touched his arm gently. Her voice was quiet but firm. That was cruel, Julian. She was clearly struggling, and he had made everything worse. Julian ran his hand through his perfectly styled hair, disrupting it for the first time in months. He admitted quietly that he knew. He knew exactly how wrong he had been. What disturbed him most was not just his terrible behavior, though that was inexcusable. It was the fact that he could not stop thinking about the woman with the fierce eyes and the small succulent plant, who had walked away without looking back even once. For the first time in his carefully controlled life, Julian felt genuinely off balance, and he had absolutely no idea what to do about it. The research. Julian spent the next 6 days unable to focus on anything else. During board meetings, he found himself distracted. While reviewing quarterly reports, his mind wandered. Grace noticed his unusual behavior and finally confronted him over coffee at his penthouse apartment. She asked what was bothering him. Julian set down his cup and admitted the truth. He could not stop thinking about the woman from the support group. Grace raised her eyebrows. The one he had laughed at and humiliated. Julian winced at the accurate description but nodded. Grace studied her brother for a long moment before speaking. She told him that if he truly felt remorseful, he should find a way to apologize properly. Not with empty words, but with something meaningful. Julian knew she was right. He hired a private investigator, not to invade Nora's privacy, but simply to learn her name and contact information. Within 2 days, he had answers. Nora Bennett, age 29, former senior architect at Palmer & Associates. She had been terminated following a panic attack during a public presentation to the City Planning Commission. But that was not all Julian discovered. Nora had designed the award-winning Riverside Art Center that had revitalized the entire waterfront district. She had created the innovative affordable housing complex that won national recognition for sustainable urban design. She had been featured in Architectural Digest as one of 30 professionals under 30 to watch. Julian kept reading, his respect growing with each accomplishment. Nora had not just lost a job. She had lost a brilliant career she had built through talent and dedication. His laugh at the support group suddenly felt even more shameful than before. The apology. 6 days after the disastrous meeting, Nora was working at her small kitchen table on freelance projects when her doorbell rang. She was not expecting anyone. Through the peephole, she saw a delivery person holding an enormous arrangement of white roses and a small potted plant. She opened the door cautiously and accepted the delivery. The roses were beautiful, but the small plant caught her attention immediately. It was a succulent, nearly identical to the one she had dropped at the community center, but healthier and planted in a gorgeous ceramic pot with hand-painted blue designs. The card attached was simple. It read, "I was wrong. I am deeply sorry. Please give me a chance to explain. Julian Hartwell." Below his name was a phone number. Nora stared at the card for several minutes. Part of her wanted to throw everything away and forget the entire humiliating experience. But another part, the part that had seen genuine regret flash across his face before she left the room, felt curious. She set the card on her counter and tried to return to her work, but found herself reading it repeatedly throughout the day. The visit. The next morning, Julian himself appeared at her apartment door. He looked different than he had at the support group. Less polished somehow, as if he had not slept well for several nights. His suit was still expensive, but his tie was loosened slightly and there were shadows under his hazel eyes. Before Nora could close the door, Julian spoke quickly. He needed her to know that he had spent the last 6 days thinking constantly about what she said. She was absolutely right about him. He had never had to question his worth because he was born into extraordinary privilege. He inherited his grandfather's venture capital firm and technology portfolio. He had spent his entire life having doors open before he even approached them. Nora crossed her arms but did not close the door. She asked why he was standing on her doorstep. Julian took a step closer but maintained a respectful distance. He explained that he could not stop thinking about what she said about finding purpose in her work. About how losing it meant losing herself completely. He had been running his companies for 12 years now. He was successful by every conventional measure. But he did not feel passionate about his work the way she clearly felt about architecture. He did not have that fire, that sense of purpose. Meeting Nora made him realize what had been missing from his own life. The offer. Nora asked again why that brought him to her apartment. Julian pulled out a business card and held it toward her. His firm had recently acquired a struggling sustainable development company. The company had brilliant engineers but terrible branding and no clear vision. They needed someone who could help them communicate their mission, someone who understood that green building was not just about solar panels and recycled materials. Someone who could help create projects that actually mattered to communities. Nora looked at the card but did not take it. Her voice was flat when she spoke. He was offering her a job because he felt guilty about laughing at her. Julian shook his head firmly. He was offering her a consulting position because after she left the support group, he had researched her thoroughly. Nora Bennett, former senior architect at Palmer & Associates. She created the design for Riverside Art Center that won the National Design Award. She developed the innovative River Heights housing project that became a model for affordable sustainable living across the country. She had been featured in major publications as a rising star in architecture. Julian's voice grew more passionate as he continued. The Palmer firm let her go because she had one bad day, one moment of human vulnerability. But her body of work spoke louder than one panic attack ever could. He needed someone with her vision, her passion, her understanding that buildings were not just structures but spaces that shaped human lives. The decision. Nora finally took the business card, studying it carefully. Hartwell Ventures, Sustainable Development Division. She asked what the position would actually involve. Julian explained that she would have complete creative control over branding and community outreach for their development projects. She would work with their engineers to ensure the designs actually served the people who would live and work in them. The salary he named made Nora's breath catch. It was more than she had earned at Palmer and Associates. Much more. She looked up at Julian suspiciously. This felt too generous, too convenient. Julian met her gaze steadily. He told her the truth. Yes, he felt guilty about his behavior. Yes, he wanted to make amends. But this was not charity. This was a smart business decision. His company needed exactly what she could offer, and she deserved a second chance after one difficult moment. Nora was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. She would consider his offer, but she needed time to think. She would not make this decision while feeling desperate or emotional. Julian nodded, respecting her boundary. He told her to take all the time she needed. His contact information was on the card. As he turned to leave, Nora called after him. She asked why he had really come to the support group that day. Julian paused, his back still toward her. His voice was softer when he answered. His sister Grace had been left at the altar 3 months ago. She asked him to attend the group with her for support. He went to be there for Grace, never expecting to have his entire perspective challenged by a stranger with a succulent plant. Nora watched him walk away down the hallway, the business card still in her hand. For the first time in 6 weeks, she felt something other than despair. She felt possibility, the first day. 3 days later, Nora stood outside the sleek glass building that housed Hartwell Ventures. She had spent those 3 days researching the company, reviewing their portfolio, and talking herself out of this decision at least a dozen times. But something kept pulling her forward. Maybe it was the genuine regret she had seen in Julian's eyes. Maybe it was her own desperate need to prove she was more than her worst moment. She took a deep breath and walked through the revolving doors. The lobby was modern and minimalist, all clean lines and natural light. The receptionist smiled warmly and directed her to the 14th floor. When the elevator doors opened, Julian was waiting. He looked professional in a charcoal suit, but his expression was cautiously hopeful. He thanked her for coming and led her through the office to a corner conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Inside, 3 people were already seated around a polished wooden table. Julian introduced them as the core team for the Sustainable Development Division. There was Chen, the lead engineer. Patricia, the project manager. And Marcus, the financial analyst. Julian explained that Nora would be working closely with all of them, but she would report directly to him. He wanted her fresh perspective on their current project, a mixed-use development planned for the old industrial district downtown. The project had stalled because community opposition was fierce. Residents felt the development would push them out and destroy the neighborhood character. Nora listened carefully as Chen presented the technical specifications. The buildings would be energy efficient with green roofs and solar panels. There would be affordable housing units mixed with market-rate apartments. Ground floor retail space would support local businesses. On paper, it looked perfect. But Nora saw the problem immediately. She asked if anyone from the team had actually talked to the residents. Had they asked what the community needed or wanted? Had they involved local voices in the planning process? The room fell silent. Chen admitted they had held 2 public information sessions, but attendance was low and the feedback was mostly negative. The truth emerges. Nora leaned forward, her passion for her work overcoming her nervousness. She explained that sustainable development was not just about green technology. It was about creating spaces that sustained communities, not just buildings. The residents were opposing the project because they felt invisible, unheard, and threatened. She suggested a completely different approach. Instead of presenting a finished plan, they should start over with community workshops. Bring in residents as partners in the design process. Learn about the neighborhood history, the existing social networks, the real needs of the people who lived there. Then create a development that enhanced what was already there instead of replacing it. Julian watched Nora as she spoke, and something shifted in his expression. He saw the fire returning to her eyes, the confidence in her voice. This was who she truly was when she was not drowning in fear and self-doubt. This was the brilliant architect he had read about in all those articles. The meeting continued for another 2 hours. Nora sketched ideas on the whiteboard, asked probing questions, and challenged assumptions the team had held for months. By the time they finished, everyone in the room looked energized. Patricia was already making notes about community outreach. Chen was reconsidering his designs based on Nora's feedback. As the team filed out, Julian asked Nora to stay for a moment. When they were alone, he spoke quietly. Watching her work was incredible. She had transformed the entire project direction in just one meeting. He was grateful she had given him this chance. The confession. Nora felt her defenses rising. She asked if he was grateful because it eased his guilt about laughing at her. Julian shook his head slowly. He was grateful because she was teaching him something important. She asked what that was. Julian walked to the window and looked out at the city below. He confessed something he had never told anyone except Grace. He had inherited his wealth and his companies, but he had never felt truly passionate about any of it. He went through the motions, made smart investments, attended endless meetings. But there was always this emptiness inside, this feeling that he was missing something fundamental. When Nora had spoken at the support group about her work being her identity and purpose, something had cracked open inside him. He realized he had spent his entire life coasting on privilege without ever finding the thing that made him feel alive the way architecture made her feel alive. Nora listened, surprised by his vulnerability. She asked why he had really laughed that night. Julian turned to face her, and his expression was raw with honesty. He laughed because her pain had made him uncomfortable. It forced him to see his own emptiness reflected back at him. It was cruel and defensive, and he had regretted it the moment the sound left his mouth. The healing. Nora walked to stand beside him at the window. She told him something she had never admitted out loud. Losing her job had devastated her because she had built her entire identity around being successful. When that identity crumbled, she had no idea who she was underneath. The panic attack at the City Planning Commission was not really about the presentation. It was the culmination of years of pressure she had put on herself to be perfect, to never show weakness, to prove her worth through achievement. Julian looked at her with understanding. They were both learning the same lesson from opposite directions. He had never had to prove his worth and felt empty. She had spent her life proving her worth and felt crushed by the pressure. Maybe they both needed to find a middle ground. Nora smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes for the first time since they met. Maybe he was right. Over the following weeks, Nora threw herself into the community development project. She organized workshops in the neighborhood, sitting in community centers and church basements, listening to residents share their stories. She learned about the retired teacher who had lived on the same block for 40 years. The young mother who needed affordable childcare. The local artist who wanted studio space. The elderly man who missed the corner store that used to sell his favorite bread. She brought all of these stories back to the team, and together they redesigned the entire project. The development would now include community spaces designed by residents. Affordable units would be protected for existing neighbors. Ground floor retail would prioritize local businesses over chains. A community garden would honor the neighborhood's history of victory gardens from decades past. The transformation. Julian watched Nora blossom in her role. Her confidence returned gradually, like a flower opening to sunlight. But more than that, he saw her learning to be gentle with herself. When she made mistakes, she no longer spiraled into self-criticism. When presentations made her nervous, she acknowledged the feeling instead of fighting it. One evening, they were working late on the final community presentation. Julian brought coffee from the break room and found Nora staring at her laptop screen with tears in her eyes. He asked if she was all right. She nodded and turned the screen toward him. It was an email from a neighborhood resident thanking her for listening, for caring, for making them feel valued in the planning process. Nora told Julian that this feeling, this connection to real people and real impact, was why she had become an architect in the first place. Somewhere along the way, she had lost sight of it in her drive for professional success. Losing everything had been devastating, but it had also freed her to remember what truly mattered. Julian sat down beside her and shared his own revelation. Working with her on this project had awakened something in him. For the first time, he felt genuinely excited about his work. Not because of profits or prestige, but because they were creating something meaningful together. The new beginning. 6 months after their disastrous first meeting, Nora and Julian stood before the community at a neighborhood celebration. The development had been approved with overwhelming support. Construction would begin in the spring. But more importantly, the process had created a template for how Hartwell Ventures would approach all future projects. Grace attended the celebration and pulled Nora aside. She thanked her for whatever she had done to her brother. Julian had changed. He smiled more, stressed less, and actually seemed happy for the first time in years. Nora admitted she had not done anything except be herself. Grace laughed and said that was exactly what Julian had needed. As the evening wound down, Julian and Nora walked through the neighborhood together. The autumn air was crisp and cool, just like it had been the night they first met. Julian stopped walking and turned to Nora. He told her he needed to say something. He thanked her for taking a chance on him despite his terrible first impression. For teaching him that success without purpose was just noise. For showing him what passion and dedication truly looked like. And for helping him understand that sometimes the worst moments in our lives create space for the best transformations. Nora reached out and took his hand. She thanked him for seeing past her breakdown to the person she truly was. For giving her a second chance when her confidence was shattered. For understanding that vulnerability was not weakness but courage. And for reminding her that losing everything sometimes meant gaining the freedom to rebuild better than before. They stood together in the fading light, two people who had found healing in the most unexpected place. Julian had learned that privilege without purpose was empty. Nora had learned that worth was not measured by perfection. And together, they had discovered that second chances could change everything when we were brave enough to be honest about our pain and open to growth. The millionaire who had laughed had learned the truth about her life. But more importantly, they had both learned the truth about their own lives and found the courage to live more authentically because of it.